this my little stumping ground too, honey.
Oh yeah, do you live here?
No, that's one of my well, obviously it's my zone. It's one of my violent crime areas.
Hmm.
Yeah. So we're out here doing a lot of work a lot of times and doing a lot of preventive things with the kids that live out in this community.
What sort of, when you say preventive, what sort of measures do you take to
Like we will come out here because typically when you have areas that have a lot of violence, there's a lot of police activity, and police officers addressing the criminal element out here. So a lot of times that's what kids see. So we come out in this in the park. We play sports with the kids to try to bridge that gap between the kids and our community. So just really good, like for um, what's coming up, spring break.
Mhm.
Like last year's spring break, we know that a lot of kids live is low poverty out here, so we provided food for the week for lunch for the kids. So, and that Friday we ended with this big, huge celebration. So,
Ah,
yeah,
very cool.
love
Now, how
that.
do the kids take to you guys? Is it like rough percentages, right? Like how many of them end up having good relationships with the police officers that come to through? Are some of them kind of hesitant just because of the idea they have of police in general, so they don't even want to interact? Like how many people end up actually speaking with the officers?
Well, in this particular area, we've done a lot of work. It doesn't happen overnight.
Oh,
And when you
yeah,
look at the contributing factors of what's going on just across the country and all the things that you see that are negative about police officers, it really it scares kids. So we try to be very proactive and getting out here and just, speaking to them on their level so they can humanize us and playing kickball, getting out here, pushing them on the swing, it really breaks those barriers. So I don't know a percentage. I just know that as law enforcement, we have to continue to be proactive and be intentional about bridging that gap.
cool, very cool. What age group is it that you're usually interacting with when you come out here?
Yeah, so the community is full of various ages. So we communicate with all ages. So obviously, our seniors and our young kids are warm and fuzzy
Mhm.
ages. So it just depends on what we're doing out here. So if we're having an event or a community meeting, typically those are adults that come out to engage and share their concerns, and we're able to inform them of what we're doing from a law enforcement perspective.
Mhm.
So of course, in those meetings, young people, kids are not usually in attendance.
Gotcha.
So the kids are usually in attendance when things are going on in the park, and it's right next to a school. So if there's any athletic activities going on, that certainly is opportunity to meet and greet young people.
Hmm. Very neat, and I imagine it'll ripple out through the parents to the kids and things along those lines. But ooh, talking about what's happening on the country at a larger scale for a second, in the bit of investigation I've done into the causes for this stigma towards police officers, one of the big things that I keep coming back to is the training officers receive, generally speaking, throughout the country. And so before I comment on that, I'm curious, what are your thoughts as you've gone through the training, you see what it's like nowadays, I'm sure as chief and running for sheriff, soon to be sheriff, Lakesha Burton, what's the name of your exact zone they're running for?
The Jacksonville Sheriff's Office.
Oh, go for all of Jacksonville?
Yes,
Oh,
Jackson.
fantastic.
Yes.
All of Jacksonville. All right, so what are your thoughts on the strong and weak points of the training system for police officers nowadays?
Yeah, so that's a great question. What I would say, there are a number of police departments across this country, and all departments are different. So, what I can do is speak about the agency that I've worked for 23 years. And I believe that we have one of the best agencies in the country in terms of training, some of the best training, technology, and certainly people.
Mm.
So I do think that as I think law enforcement has evolved over the years. So if you're still doing the same things that we did 20 years ago, I think we're behind the eight ball. But for those agencies who have not evolved with time in this generation, you will be behind. So I just think that in any organization, particularly in public safety, that we should always be looking at how we can be better, and have the latest state of the art training, that we are practicing all the best practices, and really learning from what's going on across the country. So I think training is key. It's important. And the level of training that I've received throughout my career, I really contribute that to keeping me safe and alive in this very dangerous job. So, I think, again, our agency has done really well. We are accredited agency, meaning that we kind of check off all the boxes of all the latest and greatest things that officers should be trained on. But certainly, I just think that we should always be in the posture of always improving, you know.
So when it comes to the specific improvements you'd like to make as you get into office, let's say honing in first, since we're talking about now on training, but generally speaking, throughout your agency and community, what sort of improvements are you aiming at making?
So I just think that not only here, after what had transpired in 2020 with George Floyd, a lot of the protests and that went on across the country, I think that it was important for all heads of law enforcement agencies to really look at what happened and how we could, and the impact of it in terms of the great division that happened between law enforcement and our community. So I think it's very important that building trust and building relationships between law enforcement and our community is essential.
And in what ways specifically do you think you would go about doing that? Because I love the idea of touching ground with the community so they don't see you only as the sayers, the people who
The
say no,
enforcers.
right?
Yes,
Yeah, exactly.
exactly. So, and it's a common term called community policing. And I believe that is more than just a program or um, I believe that is a philosophy that should be embedded in the hearts and minds and souls of every law enforcement officer who takes an oath to serve and protect. Community policing is exactly what we need in order to build the trust and keep trust. So community policing to me is really law enforcement being proactive and being intentional about having more positive interactions with the community that we serve. I believe strongly that your first encounter with a police officer shouldn't be when you're pulled over on a traffic stop, or perhaps you've been a victim of a crime and now we're coming out to do a report. I just think that, the more that we get out here and are intentional about building these positive relationships, we are building allies. So it's about increasing the number of positive engagements, but also it's about being intentional about building partnerships. It's just like a relationship. It is difficult to have a good relationship with somebody if you don't spend time getting to know each other, spend time having dialogue with each other. And I think that's where trust is built with that type of level of partnership and collaboration. So partnerships are important. But thirdly, when I think about community policing, it's about how police officers can, first of all, I'll just say that no law enforcement agency in any part of this country can solve the issues in our communities alone. Law enforcement can't do it alone. We have to engage with our community. We have to have positive relationships, but we also have to go in different communities, engage and understand the landscape and the people and the culture and the issues that are going on in those particular areas. And we have to problem solve those issues with people in that community. And I just think that's the only way to do it. We're sitting in a community where I was very successful with rebuilding trust to the point where it had got so bad to where you will have a shooting happen out here and you'll have 10 witnesses, but nobody would say anything because of a couple of reasons. Because of, good people living in these communities, they can't afford to live anywhere else. And they live out here and they're afraid of the criminal element a lot of times. People are afraid to report the drug dealer or the gang member. So they're afraid of retaliation. So therefore, they don't say anything. But on the flip side, they have a distrust with the police they feel like if they tell that they will be exposed. So that's a problem. So you have people living in these communities that feel like they're prisoners in their own community. And I can tell you as a law enforcement officer, in leader, that's unacceptable for me. So I just believe that we have to get into these communities and empower community to take ownership of the issues that's going on and work with us to resolve those issues.
What do you think are some of the main causes for a community getting that bad?
The main causes are really, I think the one of the main causes is poverty. I think it's poverty. I think it's layered with so many other social issues. Because if you look, like in our city, in every other city, there are pockets in different communities that have a high volume of crime. So when you see that, a lot of times there's poverty, there's no jobs, there are food deserts, there's single parents, there's mental health issue, there's drugs, I mean, it's a number of things. So I think all of those contributing factors, it creates this haven for crime.
Poverty. And when it comes to things that cause poverty, let's say specifically in this community, since you've lived in it, what do you think were some of those? Do you think it was always like that? And that's certainly gotten worse as you were describing and better due to your service. But let's say, I don't know the history of this area, but if it was good before, what do you think brought about the poverty in the first place? There are multiple layers, like you were saying, but are there some core triggers that you're thinking of?
Yeah, I think that in a lot of communities where um you see a lot of changes, and a lot of times you have homeowners that die and then their homes become rented. And then you have a lot of property owners that own apartment complexes that to where they don't even live here in the city, right? So I just think there's a lot of different reasons of why poverty happens, People fall on hard times, they lose their jobs, it's hard to get a job, and it's this ripple effect, right? You don't have a job, now you can't afford food, your lights go off, you're evicted. So it's this cycle.
Gotcha. Now, definitely, I will want to move away from the training question, but I do want to push down on it for just a little bit longer. So, when it comes to the specifics of the issues I've heard discussed in the training, it comes down largely to a lack of physical upkeep. So, after leaving the police academy, little check little checks and balances to make sure people maintain a certain fitness level, as well as the combat training for when things do get to a heightened situation. So when you're in a situation like the George Floyd, where things are very high stress, people haven't been constantly trained and exposed to a situation of such high stress and pressure. So they're more likely to panic and do freak out, emotionally explosive things, as opposed to staying calm, cool, and collected. So I'm wondering, in this area specifically, what is the training requirements for physical ability and, let's say, exposure to high stress after you've already graduated the police academy and just throughout your career?
Right. So that's a great question. So, obviously, to get into the police academy, you have to do a physical agility test, but every officer is required to maintain good health and fitness, and also each officer is required to pass a physical agility test, that same test that they take to get hired. You have to maintain that. So every year,
Okay.
we're required to do that. And as far as like the emotional part of this job, that's why constant training is important. So we certainly do it. We have our annual in-service training where all officers have to go, but training should take place every day, whether it's through discussion or through supervisors mentoring and coaching officers. So that happens every day, like at roll call, even before the shift takes place. And I can tell you every critical incident that officers are involved in, we have a safety net in place where they're required to go and debrief with a licensed mental health counselor. We have peer groups for officers. So it's constant training, and we don't wait until something happens, we prepare. So when that situation happens, we understand what to do throughout that situation. And I could just tell you the George Floyd incident, it really was a paradigm shift for us in this country and just in law enforcement. So, and from that, I think that a lot of discussion around race issues, about de-escalation, about training, empathy, all of those different conversations and topics have come up. And I think that agencies who have really hit the ground running with addressing a lot of those issues will be better from it.
Now, there was a specific thing you touched on a second ago. Oh, yes. What do you think about defunding the police? Because I've heard this discussion and I've heard certain arguments about defund, but take that money and reallocate it to, say, improving the mental health of the community or reducing the poverty of a community. But then I've also heard the flip argument that if you fund the police, the training's going to get worse, and then you'll have more George Floyd equivalents happen. And obviously, it's a much more complicated issue than this. But I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah. So I'm the type person, I make sure that I stay leveled. So, defund the police in all of these other terms, it means different things to different people.
Definitely.
What I can say as a law enforcement professional that I don't support defund the police. However, I do listen to the voices of the people, and I think that people are frustrated. People they see this huge budgets that police departments have, and they don't, and perhaps we haven't done a good job with really educating and informing people about how we're utilizing all these dollars. But people are seeing the tragedies that are happening in our communities, and they're wondering, what is law enforcement doing? Why can't they use some of that money and that huge budget to do something about it? And I'll tell you specifically for us, we have a huge budget, over $500 million, but 85% of that budget it goes towards our health benefits, so, and a lot of people don't know that. So, but what I would say is that as law enforcement officials, we work for our community. So we have to be listening and elevating the voices of our people and being responsive. So what I would say when I'm talking to people and we're sitting down having these conversations, if you listen closely to what people are saying, they're wanting this, they're wanting some of those dollars allocated to addressing mental health. They're wanting those dollars to be allocated to helping with intervention and prevention. And guess what? There's nothing wrong with that, right? So what I'll tell you with our agency, we have really done a tremendous job with really paying attention to the needs of our community. And up to date, we created a co-responder program, which wasn't new. We just embraced this model here where now we literally have licensed mental health counselors riding on the beat with police officers. And I tell you, as a police officer for years and years, we've been tasked with so many different things. Because when something happens, people call 911 and a police officer dispatched. And sometimes we've been dispatched to things that are not even police related. But over the years, we've done our very best. But now over time, as time has evolved, we're getting smarter. And we are, again, partnering with, the different entities that can help us better do our job. And so I'm very proud that we are now partnering with our mental health community, and now they're going with us for a cause. And I can tell you, it is so very beneficial for law enforcement and for the community that we serve. So I think in those terms, now you do have those, we're so divided now in our country. You have the people that's all the way to the right, people all the way to the left. And I'll tell you, the people that want to defund the police and strip police of our duties and from lawfully, enforcing the laws it is scary, and in some of those cities where you're seeing that happening, that is a city that has not put the people first. It has put people in harm's way, and you see there is anarchy going on in those cities. So I think that we have to be very, very careful when we're talking about and demanding a defund the police, that we really understand what that means versus what needs to be done.
When you're talking about the cities that have had the most anarchy, which examples are you specifically thinking of? There's one I forget the name of last year where essentially, I forget which group, they took over an entire block or several blocks and kind of held it down as this is our own
Oh
land.
my goodness, was that in Minneapolis?
Possibly.
It,
Sadly, I don't remember the.
yes.
But which examples are you thinking of when you think of it going the worst it could possibly go?
Yeah, probably Minneapolis. I think a couple places. Ooh. Um in California, they've had some things, a little pockets throughout the country, but not here. That's for sure. So, and a lot of times, the makeup of the different departments are different. Like here, you have to elect the sheriff. And some of these other cities, your government officials they pick or appoint who the chief is. And a lot of times when that happens, they have to do whatever the government officials are wanting, and we've seen that happen a lot. And sometimes it's just really not the best scenario because you have civilian people making these decisions that have never walked in the shoes of a law enforcement officer. So it's very hard to really understand what's the right thing to do, and I understand a lot of there's a lot of pressure. A lot of people in these communities are crying out that they need help. So we just got to make level decisions that's going to be best that will protect the citizens that we've been sworn to serve.
Now, I'm curious because I hear a lot about this political tension in our country and it rising and exploding, and I wonder how much it's a real issue or the illusion of an issue that's kind of hyped up by certain, I'll say, media platforms. So I'm wondering, in your grounded, like your day-to-day life, especially in your career, have you noticed political tension and divide affecting you, like here on the ground?
Honestly, yes. Yes, I believe that law enforcement has become overly politicized at a detriment of police departments across this country. And it has caused so much division from within. And I just believe that law enforcement should be nonpartisan. I took a oath to serve and protect. I didn't take an oath to serve and protect a party
Hmm.
or a person or a gender or a race. I serve people. And I just think that it's certainly, we're so divided because of parties, without a doubt.
It's really helpful that I heard, first off, the way you're describing this, that you aren't taking one side over the other, that you have that sort of I'm here to help people, period. But I actually heard about you from a police officer, and one of the things he said that really stuck with me is that he's a Republican and that you lean towards Democrat, but that doesn't matter, that you're a good leader, period. And that is what he's backing. He's not getting lost in that tribal hypnosis of Democrat or Republican. So that was very hopeful to hear.
Yes, that's awesome.
Yes.
I said I might create my own political party, purple.
Go. Oh, nice.
I understand, like, I'm a registered Democrat, but I'm a police officer, and I believe that again that law enforcement should be nonpartisan and most of my colleagues they believe the same. Literally when people call 911 or people asking for a Republican officer, or a Democratic officer, it's outrageous, So I see myself um as a unifier, right? I um I was I was very impacted by George Floyd, the impacts of that and the impact that it had on law enforcement. So, and I was very vocal back then because it was a very hard time for all law enforcement officers, but certainly for African American officers. And I took a stand and after 20 plus years of doing this job, I realized that I was both black and blue, right? And I said, I don't have to choose. Although I felt like society and my
Trying to
group
gauge.
from side to side. So I did. I felt like I was being pulled from side to side. And I finally said, look, first of all, I don't have to choose. I'm proud to be a black woman and I'm proud to be a law enforcement officer. And I'm not going to choose. Nobody's going to make me choose. I'm going to own it. I'm going to be true to who I am. And I thought, that is how we're going to bridge the gap, right? Obviously, I have this unique ability to understand the African American community and the plights. I've been in this brown skin for 47 years, but also I understand the blue. I understand law enforcement. I understand their walk. So I thought I'm going to be a bridge between that. And that was really one of the catalysts for me getting in the sheriff's race as well.
Oh, okay. So quick before I forget, shout out to Dallas, Illinois for the earlier question about training. And regarding this topic you brought up now, shout out to Renata Cortez for the following question, which is, first off, why did you choose this career? Especially as someone in, like you said, part of the Black community for 47 years, who historically doesn't have the best relationship with police. How did you end up going down this path?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So my very first thought of being a police officer when I was like 6 years old. My grandfather owned a lot of property back in Fort Lauderdale, and I remember the drug dealers watching them stop every car at a traffic light. As soon as the police would come, they would run through my grandfather's property. And my first thought was, one day I'm going to grow up and be a police officer. I can put all of them in jail, you know. I just didn't like how they disrespected my grandfather. But fast forward, you know, my dreams were to be a police officer or run track in the United States Olympics. I was super fast. And when I beat all the boys running in elementary school, I knew I was destined for the Olympics. But at the age of 11 years old, my dreams were shattered when I was sexually abused from the age of 11 to 14 years old. And, you know, my life spiraled out of control. And I thought that dream was beyond me. You know, I suffered depression, low self-esteem, and I began to look for love in all the wrong places. I ended up getting pregnant at 14 years old. I had my baby at 15 years old, and I finally got up enough courage to tell. And my very, very first encounter with a police officer was negative. A female officer, she came in and she told me that I was lying. And as you can imagine, after being abused for all those years and calling the one person that is supposed to protect me, to shut me down like that. But thank God there was another male officer there who witnessed this, and he showed me such compassion. You want to wait till they're done? Or can y'all still?
I think I'll still be able to.
Okay.
Here, say something?
Yes. Okay, good. So this one officer, I never forget, he kneeled down to me. He looked me in my eyes and he showed me such compassion. And he told me that I believe you. I'm going to make sure this man never touches you again. And I never forgot that. And that individual was arrested only to be re-released after that, shortly after that. And unfortunately, he was able to come back home, and I had a choice to make whether I would stay in that house or leave. And I left, and I've been on my own since I was 16. So when I left, I tell people I was in survival mode. I was living from place to place with my baby and so depressed and broken. I began to consume drugs and alcohol. And in 1992, I was at a crossroad ready to give up. I was contemplating suicide. And I tell people, had I had the firearm that I've been carrying for 20 plus years, I would not be here today because I felt like my life had no value. But thank God changed my life. And his plan for my life just began to manifest itself from that very moment. And from there, you know, I got back in school, started doing good in my grades. I remember in my senior year, I was nominated or selected as a turnaround student of Duval County, where the school board here gave me a car. And I tell people, literally, the year before, I was the worst kid in Jacksonville. I had a 1.2 GPA, and that is why I'm a strong advocate for our youth, because, you know, I tell people, you know, young people need opportunities. They need somebody to love them. They need to have positive experiences. And, you know, we can't just give up, you know, just what if people would have just totally given up on me, right?
You did when you said God helped you kind of bounce back. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, I will. I'd love to. So on that night when I was contemplating suicide, this lady came to me. I say she was my angel up at a store, and she's just out the blue. This stranger comes up to me. She was like, God want me to tell you that he wants to use you. And of course, I'm nervous now. I'm like, oh my gosh, this lady wasn't in the bathroom with me. I was just thinking about suicide. So she said, I want to invite
That's
you
a
to
pretty
this.
crazy.
Yeah. So she said, I want to invite you to this church revival. And, I had heard about God, had been in and out of church, and but understand I had experienced some such trauma, one of the most horrific things that can happen to a child. I was 11 years old, right? He took my virginity. And so I just could not grapple in my mind, if God was real, why did he allow all these things to happen to me? But then on the flip side, I was at a place in my life where I wanted to give up. So I felt like I had nothing else to lose by going. And so I showed up to this church. And I remember when I walked in, I remember the song that was playing, and the words of it was "Jesus is real." And I thought to myself, "Oh my gosh, you're right." So I remember sitting at in the front of the church in the pew, and I remember that the pastor, he began the service and he asked everybody to bow their heads so we can pray. And I was the only one looking around because I just was like, "Whatever, okay." So anyway, so I was like, "Let me put my head down." So I bowed my head and I said, "Lord," I said, "if you're real." I said, this is your last time chance to get me. I said, if you're real, I need to see a sign. And literally, it was as if somebody whispered in my ear, what do you want? And I looked up because I wanted to see who whispered in my ear. And nobody was around. Everybody was still had their heads down praying. So obviously, I was freaked out at that point. I was shaking. I was nervous. And I bowed my head and I said the first thing that came to my mind, I said, just take this pain away. And bam, just like that. I had such a peace that came upon me that it's really hard for me just to describe to this day. But a peace came upon me. And all I remember saying is, Lord, I said, whatever this is, if you would allow me to hold on to this, and how I describe it is I had been hurting for so long that I had forgot what it felt like to feel normal. So I felt normal. And I said, if you allow me to hold on to this normalness, um, I promise that I will tell people that you saved my life and I will serve you for the rest of my life. And I promise that I will serve others for the rest of my life. And I walked in that church a victim that night, and I walked out a victor, on fire for God, on fire to change lives, on fire to make a difference in my community. So from there, I was able to receive a full basketball scholarship to the University of Central Florida, where I was able to go to college and take my baby to college. So when I applied, once I graduated, I applied with the Orlando Police Department, and they would not hire me because I had an arrest on my record because I had gotten in some trouble through my teen years. But I already knew I wasn't upset. I looked at the police chief and I said, sir, maybe it's not meant for me to be a police officer here, but God wants me to be a police officer somewhere. And I left there and I went to my church, my pastor at the time in Orlando, and I told him everything that I just told you. And he said, well, Keisha, why don't you go back to Jacksonville? I know the sheriff in Jacksonville. And he literally called him on the phone while I was there and gave me the phone. So I had a talk with the first actually African-American sheriff here in Jacksonville over 23 years ago. And I talked with him for 5 minutes, and I will never forget the words that he said. He said, Keisha, come home. I'm going to give you an opportunity. And I tell you, I packed up my bags with my baby within 48 hours. I was back in Jacksonville. And that was 23 years ago. Huh. So the power of forgiveness, the power of giving someone an opportunity has been embedded in my whole being. So from day one, my 23-year career, every single thing that has happened to me that was hurtful, that was bad, that was shameful, I've been able to use it for good to help so many people in the trenches of neighborhoods and communities all over my city. And I am so much better for it. So yes, that was my journey of being a police officer. And now I've had such a tremendous career. And I just think that our country, law enforcement is in a critical position right now in terms of the distrust between law enforcement and our community. And I believe that three things. I think that communities need leaders to run law enforcement agencies. You need a leader that's going to be bold and courageous to lead from the front, to talk about tough stuff, right? But secondly, we need leaders who's been in the trenches of the community, who understands all people, right? All people, and who has the ability to begin to unify, you know? And thirdly, I believe that our leaders that are leading police departments, they need to have the respect of the men and women that they serve, and not respect because you have rank or position, but the respect that they know you, they know your professional career has been based on morals and values, and that you will not jeopardize your integrity, right? And that you are somebody that who truly cares about people that you serve, people on the inside and people on the outside. So, and that's why I'm on this journey to be the first woman sheriff of Jacksonville, Florida, the first Black woman sheriff in the state of Florida, and the only sixth Black female sheriff in the whole United States of America.
Wow. God damn, it seems like you got the right stuff for it.
Yes.
If it's in God's plans, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Um, okay, so we like to talk about tough issues. So I feel like one of the toughest issues regarding law enforcement right now is the drug war. And when I hear the drug war and a lot of the mindsets behind it, so specifically regarding a drug addict as someone who's made poor moral choices, it seems like and it's something that can be like punished out of them. That seems largely to me like a misunderstanding of what it means to be a drug addict. It seems like most of the time it's due to, like you were saying earlier, deep pain. Deep pain, you just want to go away. You don't really know how to do it, and that's the best way you have, maybe. And to address that as something that needs to be stomped on, and now these people are dehumanized, now they have criminal records, now they're more likely to get back in jail, all those sorts of things doesn't seem to be helpful. So what are your thoughts on the drug war?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I was that person. I was that person, unseen, ridiculed, judged, not seen as human, when I was younger, consuming drugs. So I understand what that feels like. And I also look at it from a different lens, right? I endured tremendous trauma, and a lot of people do, you know, at not at their own fault, right? But you learn how to cope with when you don't have a support system, when you don't have services and resources to help you come out of the slump, you resort to things that will really deaden your pain. And that's I'm speaking from real life experience. Um, Drugs and alcohol, I consumed it because I wanted to drown out my pain and, all the hurt and the disregard, that I experienced. And so I understand that. So I just think that there needs to be, number one, more compassion, there needs to be more education, more awareness of the whys this is happening. But certainly those who are selling drugs, they need to be addressed. They need to be arrested. We need to build cases for those who are out here selling drugs to our community. So I just think that in everything that we do, we should be looking at it from a holistic approach and not just one way, an enforcement, because a lot of times enforcement only worsens the problem. You can arrest a drug addict, and if you really look at the records, the arrest records of some people that may be drug addicts, right? You'll see it's a revolving door because we're not addressing the root cause of what's going on. So this person not only has a trauma, need mental health counseling, but they need, drug rehab, but also a support system, but then resources to get them back on their feet.
Yeah.
So they won't continue to be this cycle. So I just believe that it's important to look at all issues that we have from a holistic approach. And so we can make sure that we are addressing it from all angles.
Because there's a lot of importance there that I want to dive into. But before then, I want to talk about something a little lighter for a second. How's your daughter? How's your daughter?
Mhm.
How's your
Yeah.
son doing? Yeah.
Well, so he's about to be 32. I had three biological sons. So it's 32. One, my middle son's 19 and one is 11. And I can tell you they're all different. They all are different. They were born in different eras of my life. And my oldest son would tell you that I have spoiled my two younger sons to death. They had everything. And I tell them I was a teen mom when I had you. I couldn't afford anything. So they are truly they are my why. I have always raised them to never give up. I've raised them to always do your best. I've raised them to be kind to people and not to be judgmental. And I'm very proud of all three of them.
When you say non-judgmental, because this is a theme I've heard before, and it's a strange thing to pair because there's something very useful in the rule of thumb, don't be judgmental, but then you're also a police officer, right? So that requires judgment. It requires the ability and the will to say, no, like this is wrong, stop this. So what do you mean when you say to not be judgmental?
So basically, I believe that no matter who you are, if you are a human, we have biases. We just do. So what I've tried to do with my sons is expose them and talk to them about all of the different aspects of life. Obviously I have overcome a whole lot of different things in my life that the normal person don't even, see in a lifetime. So I just believe that in every situation there's a story behind it. But obviously in law enforcement, I think that every day as a law enforcement officer, we have to be intentional about making sure that we don't bring in our personal biases when we're dealing with people. And it's a conscious effort that you have to make because we are human,
Yeah,
right?
you're working at like human programming.
So I just think that as a law enforcement officer, you have an extra responsibility to do that, especially if you are going to be fair and impartial to people. So, for example, I'll give you this example. Years ago, when I was in academy, we were doing some diversity training, and they started. The question was posed: if you pull up to a club where gay men are a gay club, and you see two men outside kissing in front of the club. Well, most of the class obviously is all mostly male. This is a male dominant profession.
3 decades ago.
Yeah, 20 some years ago. So I'm like one or two women in the class. And they said, how many of y'all would arrest these two gay men? And the whole class raised their hand except for me. And I was disturbed. I said, well, first of all, it's not a violation of law. It's a personal feeling because you are not accepting of the gay lifestyle, but does it make it a crime? No, it doesn't. So all of you are wrong. So that's what I'm talking about. Really checking our biases and our personal beliefs. Even a lot of times I have to say political beliefs, there's really no room for biases and prejudices and putting your personal feelings. The laws are the laws, and we need to govern accordingly and treat people with dignity. So I just think that is something that we all should do.
So this idea of like clearing the mental slate before I assess the situation, right?
Yeah.
I'm trying to see it as it is and then make my judgments accordingly, not it's all like you said.
As much as possible, I think it's important and it'll keep you honest. And that's what I've always done, because if you continuously practice that, it becomes habit for you. So when you do have these high stress critical situations, you're going to resort back to your training and what you've been practicing, and it'll help really have a better outcome in that situation.
Definitely. Okay, shout out to Seth Patterson for the following question. Have you ever seen malpractices in all your years, specifically when you're working the beat, right? Like when you're here out on the ground level? Have you ever noticed malpractices from, and we don't need any names, but
Right.
just a fellow officer, something along those lines?
Yes, absolutely. So Um, my first day in training, my first week in training, I went to a call, and I've been talking about this my whole career, where I went to a call, and I was with my male counterparts, and they arrested a black male for robbery. And the guy was compliant. He was in the backseat of the police car, handcuffed, and they began kicking him. And of course, I was disturbed. I was in training. It was my first week in training, and so I got home. I was very disturbed. So I called the other recruits that were in my academy class. We were all in training together, and I told them what happened. And they said, Keisha, don't tell, because you may not pass through the training. And my immediate reaction was, if I fail out of the academy, I just fail, because I'm going to report this tomorrow. So that's the type of person that I've always been. So, and obviously, I knew early on to impact and influence and make change that I needed to have a seat at the table, and I needed to be promoted, because the higher you go, the more influence you have over more people. So I was very blessed to get promoted early on in my career. I was the only fourth black female police sergeant, the only second black female police lieutenant in this agency. So, but I can tell you, I've always addressed malpractice or things that were against what I believe in and why I took this oath. So, and I've been very proud of that. And I think that I have a reputation of being someone who will speak up and stand up for what's right. I learned how to do that when I um, reported that I had been sexually abused. I think that's where my boldness, stepping up and holding people accountable, really began. So it hasn't been hard. And I tell officers all the time, the moment that you don't say anything, you're complicit in it. And it makes whoever's doing the bad, make it as if it's okay, and it's not okay. So, but I think that over the years with, creating policy where officers have a duty to act, and creating pathways and making it a culture where leaders are creating a culture where officers know that you can speak up, you can turn in bad people, and you will not have any retaliation. For it. So I think that community, that environment is extremely important in law enforcement.
I've heard a lot of the blue silence. I don't think that's the right term for it. But like, if you see one of your brothers in arms do something wrong, you kind of the opposite of what you're saying, right? You say hush, hush. And I'm sure you've talked to police officers from other areas that you haven't worked in. Have you ever heard of examples where corruption got to the level of like high command? Or
Yeah, I honestly, and I don't think that, that term hush hush, I honestly, I don't see it like that. I don't think that's what happens. I think what happens is you have officers that are just are in a situation where they don't know what to say or do, or they are fearful of being the person who tells. So it's not like this, hey, let's get together. Hey, we're going to be silent about this.
Mhm.
We're going to cover it up. It's not that type of corruption like back in the day, perhaps it was, but it's not that. It's just a failure to act. It's a failure to speak up because of, you're scared. You're worried about your job. You're worried about your position. You're worried about probably being the outcast. But what I would say to those who fall in those categories, that it's worth it. It's worth being ostracized. It's worth being retaliated against. It's worth not being able to move from one place to another. It's worth it. And that is how you maintain the integrity of law enforcement.
how you sleep well at night.
Yes, absolutely.
So going back to the drug war, um, industrialized prisons, right? That does seem to be a big problem when it comes to actually being able to solve and change the mindset towards people who end up being drug addicts and things along those lines. It doesn't seem to be an investment in solving the problems. It seems like there's a lot of monetary investment in keeping things the way they are. Throughout your career, have you seen ways in which that can be overcome, in which even though you don't have the power of great money behind it, or even if this person has a strong incentive to given to the desire of people with a lot of money, where they opposed it and successfully.
Yeah. So that's a big question. So what I would say is that for me, I am someone who focuses on what I have control over and what I can impact in making change and making a difference where I am. And I certainly believe that, you know, money in this country, oh my gosh, there's a lot of corrupt things happen because of money. But when we get to the point as citizens and members of any community that you live in, and when we get to the point where we realize that our voices matter, our votes matter, and voting um, public officials in office who align with our morals and values and who are going to do the things at the grassroots level, at the foundation level that we need. Until then, is very difficult. So money will always kind of determine the course in which we go. But I just think on a local level, when people really buy into the real issues and rally together and come together to make change and affect change, I think only until then things will start to happen. So, and I'll tell you, just as a law enforcement professional and a zone commander of this area, I it's important. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of repetition. It's a lot of, failures. But for me, I tell my officers, keep going. Keep going to that community that keeps slamming their door in your face. Keep going to that community who don't want to give you anything. Keep going because we have to show goodwill. We have to show that we're committed. We have to show that we care. And one day you're going to get a breakthrough. And that's what we were able to do out here in the Justina area. And we were able to get that breakthrough. And from that breakthrough, it was a ripple effect in a community that has historically had a drug problem, gang problem, poverty problem, and crime problem, and a distrust for police. But now we've had that breakthrough. When you get that breakthrough, it is amazing what happens. People start working together. They start calling us saying, hey, this happened or this happened. They start taking ownership of their community. And what happened here, they created their own Facebook page and they named it Justina Community. And I tell people this, I get so excited about this and people don't understand, but I'm going to show you. I know we're
cool.
So
I can send a link to this on
so I want you to see that. What does it say at the top?
Just Justina Community.
Okay, so freeze right there. So we're talking about a community who has been plagued with violent crime historically. Violent crime, all the social impacts, that you can think of. Distrust for police, a lot of criminal elements out here, meaning drug activity, gang violence, distrust from us. So now we've able to really infiltrate that distrust, turn it around, empower our community to trust us and take back their community by providing support, providing resources and us working together. They don't see us as us against them. They see us as we, as partners working together. What happened was they created on their own this Facebook page and they titled it Justina Community. Let me tell you something. When people that live in high violent crime areas see themselves as not living in the hood or the ghetto and they see themselves as community, that's powerful. Mentally, emotionally. Now they see themselves as part of a community. Do you want to be a part of the ghetto? Do you want to be a part of the hood? You grow up, you become what you are, what the environment you live in. So now you start to change the minds and the hearts and the psyche of people that can't live anywhere else, but now understand that they have the power to make it better, right? That's where it starts. So the better is happening. And as a result, this you got the Justina Community Facebook page. And now they allow us to communicate with them. They're communicating with each other, So we're becoming this one voice. This one voice working together will drown out the criminal element that's loud. in a lot of our communities. And that should be our goal. And that is something that law enforcement can't do alone. We need to do it with our community. So I'm very proud of that work. But that work, that's a lot of work, and it's ongoing and it's consistent. You know why? Because people are going to grow older and they're going to move out of here and new people are going to come in. But the mission and the position of law enforcement should not change. We should come out here and treat them and value the people that live out here just like we would with people that live in upper class neighborhoods, right? And see them and hear them, deal with the criminal element that's out here. But everybody out here is not committing crime, right? And we just really need to elevate those good citizens that live in these communities and make sure that they trust us and they know that we have their back. I know I'm very passionate about this. So
Oh, I love it. It's perfect. It's funny what you're saying is like click, 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 click. Because I've been researching performance psychology for the past couple of years, right? Just as a way to improve life in general. And the things you're sticking on, right? Like the importance of grit, the importance of sticking with it no matter what. There's a great book called Grit by Angela Duckworth. Yeah. And she talks about consistently amongst many different fields of competition and fields where people can succeed, where you look at someone, you're like, all right, that person is succeeding consistently. The common theme was willingness to stick with it, keep putting like intense focus and passion behind it. Despite many failures, it didn't matter. Like you stuck with it. You really cared about it. And it didn't matter what obstacles you were faced with, you just kept hammering away. And there are other factors that obviously affect whether you succeed in something or not, but that seems to consistently be the main one. And one of the biggest promoters of grit is passion. So it seems like you have the winning combination.
yes, that's the story of my life.
Hell yeah.
Correct.
Okay. On this note, we'll pull up the question list. So far, we've been flowing very nicely just off the top of the head. Next question would be gang culture, rap culture, right? Like this culture almost promoting a lifestyle of drugs, money, violence, as if it's something cool and attractive. I wonder, like, what are your thoughts on that sort of culture in general? Why do you think it's so attractive to people? That lifestyle, the Al Pacino Scarface sort of.
Yes. Oh, we could talk forever about this topic. So what I would say is that I've seen a paradigm shift in young people, with this music. Do I think that it feeds to delinquent behavior or crime? A lot of the music does. I listen, I hear it a lot of times. Any music, videos, video games, anything that contributes to
Thank you.
anything that promotes violence, anything that promotes destruction. Um, you know, sometimes I cringe listening. I hear some of the music and I'm just like, how in the world is this allowed on the airwaves? But let me tell you, that's why it's so incredibly important for parents and those who are raising kids to safeguard what their kids are doing, what they're listening to, where they're hanging out, what they're feeding into their souls is so important. I think that's the number one thing. So, and then a lot of times I've done a lot of work with gang members, and I've even written a program or gang intervention years ago. But what I tell people, let's take this communities that have historically been plagued with violent crime. What happens is you have a lot of broken families. You have a lot of single parents that's trying to do the best they can, and fathers are absent. That's a big deal when fathers figures are absent from the lives of particularly young men lives.
Why do you think that's such a, because that is a common stereotype of the Black community.
Yep.
Why do you think that is? Young men that typically like to get laid and kind of run off, right?
Yeah, we have to work on that. We need to be instilling the value of responsibilities, the value of, being parents. So, I mean, that's a big discussion.
Yeah.
But what I want to say is that a lot of times all kids need love and validation and a support system. I don't care who you are. And when you don't have that, whoever comes along to fill in that void,
Yeah.
and that's what
Community, your
that's
family.
that's what happens. Like I've worked with a young, I've talked with them, and they don't see this individual as a menace to society or somebody who's destroying our communities. They see this as my brother. They see this as an uncle. They see this as a father figure, and that person feels a void. And unfortunately, it's a negative void. So then that person um, kind of follows in the footsteps of who they think is their role model and somebody that's giving them love. So that's why I'm a big advocate for young people. I advocate for early intervention and prevention with now I ran the nonprofit here. I was the first woman to run the police athletic league here. And it was actually the very entity that saved my life. I went to the PAL when I was 16 years old because a police officer took me there. So who would have thought years later that I would run the very entity that saved my life,
Well,
right?
you could tell yourself that at 16.
I know, right? I just think that does it have a negative effect on our kids? Absolutely.
Now, there's a weird. Do you think there's any productive sort of violence? And by that, I'm thinking specifically of martial arts, right? Because I'm a big proponent of martial arts, and I find that this is the kindest people I meet consistently, and it's very
Yeah.
strange.
Yeah.
Are people you'll meet in a jujitsu class where you're trying to choke someone out or
Yeah.
like get them in an arm bar. They're the kindest, most respectful, like tight knit community, but it's centered around largely violence. So almost it's like a productive sort of violence.
Right. Well, well, a lot of our officers, we offer that, martial arts in,
Not right now.
we offer, martial arts. A lot of officers do it. It is, I think it's good. I think that it is discipline. That's part of training too, because, this is it's a very dangerous profession. And the more equipped we are in terms of physically, mentally to survive, people are out here, officers are being murdered every day somewhere in this country, ambush, So, I think it's important. So I think that when you look at the why behind it, that makes sense. I think the whys are very different. So you have people that are practicing and exercising and filming themselves and rapping about how they're going to murder and kill individuals. When you're training for martial arts, you are training on survival techniques, right? So not to inflict pain and violence,
For like
just
joy and
for the joy of it. Right.
oh, that's a weird one. I was listening to this conversation with Snoop Dogg the other day, and he said in his earlier raps, he rapped a lot about death and violence and like the doom, like he's dying young, like things like that. That was in the spirit of what he would rap about. And he looked at Biggie and Tupac and that they rapped about the same thing, and eventually that lifestyle likely is what killed them. And kind of gave him a perspective shift where he started to think, I want to rap a little bit more from a place of positivity so that when I'm planting these thoughts, these songs, like you say, into your soul, into your psyche, into your subconscious, it's something that's promoting more love and things to that effect. But it's strange because he pairs that with, he'll still feature in people's songs that do have a very violent sort of rap, but it's a weird thing I'm trying to wrap my head around, in which there is no longer, at least as he described it, this East Coast West Coast tension where they're at war with one another. So he had a rap song with East and West Coast rappers in the same rap, but they're rapping about the gang genre of rap, right? So it's inherently, there's a lot of violence to it and drugs and things along those lines. And it was so weird for me to like pair that. This feels like there's something I'm missing, that he does seem to be, we're not actually hurting another as we rap, weirdly enough. And for a lot of people, it's just an enjoyable song to pop their head to. It's the strangest thing. I'll drive down the street in my hometown neighborhood and you'll see like Like you'll hear from the distance the booming of like hardcore gangster rap, and you'll pull up to the car, and it's this like middle class young white woman who you can see was like just leaving a shift at Starbucks, and you're like, there's something weird going on here.
Huh?
I, it, it makes me think that maybe there's a way in which you can have these sorts of expressions of violence and aggression of a dark side and see it more as a fiction, almost like you're watching a horror movie, or you're watching a movie about gang life, or you're watching a like you ever see The Joker?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or you're watching a movie like that. I don't feel more compelled to act as he did by watching the movie, and it's a weird line to draw because I can see conceivably that it could be a movie where someone watches that and they see Joker as their hero, like he's speaking out for this dark part of them and this dark part of society that maybe needs to get burned down. I don't agree with that, but I can see someone seeing that movie and having it, that idea, that spirit within them, get strengthened by seeing that. And
Speaking of the Joker, I had such deep emotions for
me
that.
too.
Being somebody who's walked in that shoes, struggled with mental health, trauma, not being seen, so but it also, um, it, it really reaffirmed my desire to work more in the mental health field. Back to the rap. Listen, I believe in freedom of speech. After 23 years in this profession, I reject any type of violence, whether it's written, verbal, rap, or whatever. That's just me personally. As I've seen some of the most horrific things that violence does. So I am truly anti-violence. Matter of fact, I traveled all the way to India back in 2017 to trace the steps of Dr. Martin Luther King because he used a lot of Gandhi's principles of nonviolence. So I am someone who believes in nonviolence. Do I want my children? Do they listen to some of that stuff? Yes. Do I want them? No. Now, I used to be young too. And I used to listen to a lot of different things, and you grow and you're in different spaces in your life. So I don't listen to Tupac and Snoop Dogg and all these different people anymore. So I don't, so it's good that he's moving away from the violent stuff, and hopefully he'll continue. So for me, and it's just a personal thing, it is hard to be, if you want to be seen as a positive person but also want to have one foot on the negative side too. Like I just say you have to choose what your pathway is going to be. I really identify what your purpose is on this earth, and you walk in it and you own it. So, and that's what I do, so I'm a very positive person. That don't make me weak. It makes me strong. I'm very leveled, when I need to get down to the business, I put a lot of people in jail. I'm hard on crime, right? But I just think from a law enforcement perspective, you just can't be hard on crime. You just can't be focus on enforcement, because you leave out a whole community that needs us, right? So going back to this holistic approach, and everything that we do, we should look at it from a holistic approach, right? And going back to what you say, not judging somebody. We drive by a homeless person on the side of the road. We can't just say, oh, he's a bum. You don't know what this man's life has been like. We have a lot of veterans that are homeless. So I just think that we just have to take a split second to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, right? And then also think about the things that I do, the things that I say, how is it going to impact? And I think that when you are in a leadership role, whether you're famous or a rap superstar, model, or a sheriff candidate, I think that you really have to be mindful about your platform, and make sure that you're using it for good.
Definitely. And yeah, that's definitely very perspective setting that you definitely don't want to hear this music or have people exposed to, because you've seen the reality of when people actually live out these songs, right?
That's right.
And it can be a fiction for some people, and it can be just a nice song to bop to, but it can also be something very, very, very real.
Yeah. And I think that in this generation of time, it's more detrimental We've seen it, you know. You see the stats in reference to how even social media is impacting this young generation, you know, the negatives causing depression, you know, and loneliness. I mean, young people are committing suicide, you know, so just imagine what the negativity of songs is doing and the video games is doing, you know. Personally, I saw a change in my, you know, middle son when he was young. You know, so I was very cautious and protective and, you know, because I was worried about what was coming in. But the beauty of that is that he had a mother who was very in tune um, and present to understand. I got to make sure he has a balance. I don't want to take away his young childhood, but he needs to make sure that he's grounded in morals and values and understand what's fiction and what's not, you know? And I just think that a lot of young people are growing up and they don't know that this stuff is fiction. They're acting it out. It's a copycat. We see it all the time, you know? And literally, when I was working with the gangs, they do a lot of these videos. They're talking about what they've done. They're talking about what they're going to do, and they do it, you know? So I don't think we're operating in this fantasy world anymore.
There's a weird influence when it comes to rap of rappers who don't live the lifestyle but rap about it like they do. It's very weird. It's these people that recognize, like, oh, this is a wave, this is a pop trend I can hop on. So I'll rap about drugs and money and violence, but I've never done any of it. And it's very funny because sometimes you'll hear the rappers who have lived more of a lifestyle like that, and they'll sort of verbally attack the person for, like, you don't do any of this. You're rapping from a place of BS, honestly, just trying to
be a part of
the fame, the clout. Yeah. Yeah.
Speaks to the emotional intelligence and lack of maturity and a need, such a desire to feel, you know, seen and valued and needed. You know, I think so. You know,
community.
Yeah. So everybody wants to feel part of a community. So communities are very, very different. You know, sometimes I don't understand a lot of different communities, you know, but to those who are in it, that's all they know and all they see.
Yeah.
So it's better to be in that than alone.
This is very interesting to remember that the worst thing they can do to you in prison, as far as punishment from the prison perspective, is put you in solitary confinement by yourself.
Yeah.
Like you're surrounded by murderers, rapists, and drug dealers and all that, but the worst thing they can do is take you away from them and just leave you with yourself in a tiny room. That's, definitely talks about the importance of being around other people, community, exposure. Man, that's when I hear people talk about the root of a lot of the issues that we face nowadays in just modern society, a lot of it tends to come back to this. I've heard it described as like a God-shaped hole in people's lives, where people are lacking community, people are lacking exposure to what genuinely makes life good. And they're living out this idea of, I don't know, if I have enough money, my life will be good, or if I just work the 9 to 5 and walk the stereotypical path, my life will be good. And there is a lot of good in both those paths, but
I understand exactly what you're saying. So, and I'm so grateful for my path in life because somebody asked me just earlier today, you know, I said that I wouldn't change anything that I've gone through. And they were like, are you kidding me? I said, no, because I know what's important. I know I'm a living witness to money. All the money in the world won't make you happy. The biggest house, the fancy car, promotions, titles. I recognize and I appreciate the value every morning that I wake up and I just have peace, that I have joy, that I am not where I used to be. So all that I have been through, I should be dead. I should be in prison. I should be crazy out of my mind, but I'm none of the three. right? So when I think of that perspective, it makes me so very grateful for all that I've been through because it has made me who I am, right? But the best part of it, Cortez, is I get to help and relate to people on such a deep level. So when I come across people that are hopeless, I can tell them there is hope. When I meet people who have been victimized and feel so ashamed and embarrassed, I can tell them it wasn't your fault, that you are somebody, that your past does not have to define who you are. What happened to you is just what happened to you. It's not who you are. And I can tell them that whatever happened in your past it doesn't dictate your future, right? Just meeting people on this journey and even today, like, and being able to relate and see people who feel unseen and be able to elevate the voices of people who feel like their voices aren't heard, and just to be able to talk to somebody that say, look, I've been there, that happened to me, and they see that I live with such liberation. They see that you can be made whole, you can heal, you can be liberated from this. People just don't know how. They don't think it's possible, and they haven't met anybody. So every opportunity, every day, like, I look for that. I look to be that change and make that difference in somebody's life. And when you realize what you were made for, what you were put on this earth for, it's not to have a big old house. I mean, not knocking all that. That's good. I'm trying to downsize now. It's too much to clean up, you know? But yeah, so when you really find out what your purpose is in life and you embrace it and you own it and you say, look, I'm going to wake up every day and I'm going to make a difference for somebody. That is depositing and contributing good to this world, to this very bad world. It's a bad world out here, and I choose every day not to contribute to bad or evil. I'm committed to doing good. My platform, my personal life, my professional life, and that is the legacy that I want to leave.
I love it. I love this because what you tapped on is this deep, deep conversation that's been going on probably since whenever people started inventing, well, not inventing, because that's a weird conversation to get in, but whenever we started recording religious ideas and conversations and things like that, the the devil's argument of is if life can be this bad, kind of like you were thinking earlier when you were young, is it even worth it? Is existence even worth it? Maybe it should just all be ended and nothingness would be better than actually living life. And to recognize that I I don't know for sure that for every single person there is a way to that life of goodness and of worthwhile sort of life, but it's so incredibly hopeful and wonderful to hear from you and from other people who have gone through the most insane shit imaginable that you can hit that, and that as the years go by you can look back on it and say, I wouldn't have changed any of it. It all ended up being worth it. But speaking
And just I'll just say this. I in this male dominant profession, when I started 20 something years ago, you couldn't talk about compassion. You couldn't talk about
mental
empathy.
drive we have.
Exactly. So you have to conform to this male, dominant profession. And I'm just glad I've never lost myself. Although I conformed,
You've been around for
what I did was I tell people that I put compassion on my award on my shoulder and not at the forefront, because I wanted to make sure I was part of this team. And it wasn't until 2017 when I went to India and I sat and I listened to a guru there. And when he was done talking, he talked about compassion. And of course, I was all ears because compassion, I've been wearing it on my shoulders all those years. And when he was done, out of all the people that was there, I came all the way from the United States to India. This man didn't know me, but he got up from where he was sitting and he came through the audience and he came to me. And the very first thing he said to me, he said, you have an incredible amount of compassion. Use it. And when I tell you I was fired up, I came back to the United States unapologetic about who I am, who God created me to be. This gift and talent and quality that I have, that I had because of a profession, a climate and culture of a profession that said that that wasn't necessary or it wasn't needed. And in all actuality, that's the one thing that they say is lacking in law enforcement.
Hmm.
It's empathy. So anyway, I came back unapologetic, right? And I said, on this journey, law enforcement has to evolve. It has evolved. And it's okay for you to have a leader that says love wins, that compassion is important, that having empathy is important. We need those things for those who are we are serving that have been victimized in this community. Now, the people that are doing the victimizing, the criminals, I'm not saying we are going to follow the laws. We're going to, not violate people's rights, but compassion is an essential skill and part of law enforcement that we need a leader to come in and embrace that and show them how it's done. And it's okay. And I'm telling you, that is the piece, that is the only piece of law enforcement that is going to have a community begin to trust us and have a community believe that we care about them.
When I think compassion, I think, and I want to know if you agree with this definition of it, that I see someone, let's say they're hurting, and empathy would be, I feel your pain. Compassion would be, I relieve your pain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah.
Yes.
The Dalai Lama has a really funny quote. He's like, empathy is you see someone on a boulder or like a boulder's crushing them and you go under the boulder with them. But compassion is I remove the boulder from you. Yeah.
Amen.
And to see that as, to have the police force be, because especially as historically across the world, violence has been lowering. It's an incredible trend that is talked about not nearly enough, that violence has been going down over the past few decades and 100 years, globally speaking. Violence.
And it's a lot of because of the efforts around community policing.
I would definitely imagine, right?
Yeah.
Where they start to become not just this draconian, I'm here to whip you guys, follow the service, but man, what you were talking about earlier is something I think about a lot, and it's something that really impacted me because I grew up with the idea of to be like the ideal self, right? Especially as a man, the cold front, you don't feel emotions, to cry is to be weak, and all that sorts of thing. But as I'm getting older, the person I admire is much more the man who at a funeral can cry, right? Who can let himself go absolutely and just be a blubbering mess of tears. But if it's time to carry the casket, he can still stand up and carry the casket. Right. It's not like I'm broken because I'm hurting. I can hurt and still do what needs to be done. I can still be strong even though I'm crying. There's something to letting that emotional release come out.
Absolutely. And really, when you get to that point, and particularly men, I have a lot of male officers, when you get to that point and you allow yourself to be vulnerable, that is where growth and strength takes place. You become stronger every time, because that type of manhood has been embedded in the fabric of our society. That's why people are so, reluctant to really accept boys being on the cheerleading squad, because of that. So I think it's commendable and I believe that's a real man. People say I'm a real man, but society has defined what a real man is, but real men is what you just described. A real man, a real woman, a real man is someone who operates in their authenticity, right? Whatever's normal, or when you are able to operate from inside out, that's what's real. That's when you can call yourself a real person, because if you're holding back or you're not doing something,
You don't even know what you're feeling.
that's right. That's real. So that's being a real.
And
Yeah.
it seems to come a lot from war, I'd guess.
Yeah.
Since we're so close to World War II, I mean, historically speaking,
Yeah.
and Korea and Vietnam, and that there's a great TED talk about it. Like when you're on the battlefield, and if your buddy just gets blown up right next to you, that isn't the time to cry. Now
Right.
you need to like stay focused on the mission ahead. But when you're back to base and everything, the guards can be let down. That's the time to like just
Yeah. So that is that's a great analogy for what needs to take place with law enforcement. And I believe that. So when you become a police officer, you have this warrior mindset and you have this guardian mindset. When we're out there on the battlefield, we're taking down an active shooter. That's not a time to be compassionate and empathy, crying and stuff like that. We're ready to take this sucker out, right? But after that is all over, right? After that's done and you're de-stressing and, from this traumatic experience, a week later, a month later, that's the time to open up. It's the time to say, hey, brother, sister, you okay? Look, that's the time to say, hey, how are you feeling? How did that infect you? This is what happened to me. This is how, so you can walk through this thing together.
Yeah.
So you can become stronger and heal mentally, emotionally.
It's part of it. You just feel better.
Yeah. So, and that's important. That's why I'm proud to say that we have these peer groups, that we have. But even in the peer group, there's still work to be done, because we got to get the person to the peer group. And then not only get them there, but when they get there, they got to be open.
Yeah.
They have to feel it's a safe space to be vulnerable, to open up and get the help that they want.
I was in I don't know if you ever heard of ayahuasca. It's this old shamanic sort of medicine. And I went to this retreat earlier in the summer, and a bunch of people do it together, and you're guided by these shamans through the process. And there are points where you talk about your experience, and it was so weird because these people, these strangers who were certainly family by the end of the week, but were strangers before then, we were so open without worry about being slapped down for whatever you might say. Like, whatever you had to say, whatever you had to share, there were moments where everyone would be quiet and you just say it. And there was such a lack of filter. And it seemed like that lack of filter was one of the keys to make it an actual wonderful healing experience. And it strikes me that when I talk with my friends and my family, just people in day-to-day life, we may have little moments of that, little snippets of that. And it's funny, I've heard the same from psychologists. People come to me to have like a real conversation where I can just say what's on my mind. I don't have to worry about embarrassing myself or embarrassing you, or being politically correct or being polite. Like, we can just have this open flow in all its raw. Maybe there's probably going to be some ugliness to it and discomfort and all that. But to be willing to let that out, I think we really can use some more of that from what I've seen.
I totally agree. I totally agree. And really, that's what I did with my officers after the whole George Floyd thing. I have about 160 officers that work in this area for me. And that's what I did. I sent out an email and said, listen, I'm coming to you as Keisha, as a Black woman, as a Black leader in law enforcement all these years, as a mother who's raised 3 Black sons, because a lot of the officers that work with me are Caucasian. So I wanted to make sure that my brothers that I work with understood me, my perception, how I was feeling. And so that's what I did. And for a couple months, I met with most of all my officers and had these real, authentic, organic, open, raw conversations. And 100% of them, they appreciated it.
Yeah,
As a matter of fact, they said, why don't we do this more?
That's a good question. Why don't we?
That's right.
I wonder if that has to, and I apologize a little bit for staying on such a, intense conversation.
It's good.
I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, this weird culture we have of bullshit being allowed a little too much, and I think specifically about the sales tactics that are allowed, and just that mindset and how it spreads throughout the culture as a whole, right? And I'll use a simple small example of a commercial for like a McDonald's burger, and damn well in the commercial none of it's real food. A lot of it's being designed to just look as delicious as possible. You're like, the burger is not that juicy, the food isn't that fresh, but it's accepted because it's giving you this feeling, this good feeling, right? And it's almost like a lie. I think about it as the "do I look fat in this dress" metaphor, right? This culture of no, you don't look fat in the dress, and you think they look fat in the dress, but you think you want to make them feel better by lying to them. And I don't know where that came from, but yeah, it definitely seems off. So we could definitely use a little more honest
Yeah,
conversation.
absolutely. It's, when I took over and I ran a nonprofit, the first thing I learned about was branding, the brand, what we put out, the pictures, everything. It's the brand.
Mhm.
And obviously I'm running for sheriff now. It was the brand. I spent a lot of time
Fair enough.
brand. So, but it's about the person behind the brand. It's about the product behind the brand and the person that has the product. So I said that to say, for me, I believe in truth. I believe that we are lacking real leaders who will will not compromise integrity, that will do the right thing every time. And that can be done, but because of the politics and all the money and this, that, and the other. So I just think that for me, my brand will be truth. And so I'll give you an example. So I am a registered Democrat, and I had somebody ask me the other night. They said, "Well, is the Democratic Party, are you going to be their choice?" They said, "Because your views may not align with them." And my response was, my race is not for the party, it's for law enforcement.
And what do you mean when you say is how does running for sheriff work? When you say the party might not back you,
Yeah.
will they end up like funding your campaign if they agree with what you're going for?
Yes, I think because there's several other candidates that are Democrats in the race.
Gotcha.
So I am very conservative, and I am not. My candidacy is not going to be swayed based upon party. It's going to be swayed upon what's right. What's right for law enforcement, what's right for our community, and so because you'll have people that will align themselves with whatever, and just to get the job,
Hmm.
you know, just to
I
get the
think people are
job.
getting tired of that.
Uh, I hope so.
Yeah, yeah, right.
And I know people should be tired. That's why I wanted to make sure that next year in this city that they have an option on the ballot, option in Lakesha Burton, where they know that this is somebody who has a very deep moral compass, and just really refuse to compromise integrity, and really have spent a whole lifetime and professional career of doing the right thing, and also being in the trenches of this community, but doing the right thing for our community and also doing the right thing for law enforcement and for our city. And that is the leader that this city deserves.
There's a great conversation between Joe Rogan, Tulsi Gabbard, and this guy called Jocko Willink. And at one point, the topic is brought up of Tulsi Gabbard. She was one of the presidential candidates who was running, and she goes against a lot of what the party promotes. And the question was brought up to her, do you think it would have been more strategically intelligent to toe the party line for now? So in your campaign, promote the things that the party wants you to promote. But when you get into the position of power, then you actually implement these things that you felt were the right thing to do. And that seemed to me a very tough moral question. And she fell on your side of the aisle where it's like, no, I feel like people are sick and tired of the politician who says they're going to do one thing and then they get in office and they do another. And also, it's a weird race of, okay, so I get into office, but now I want to get reelected for the second run as campaign. So maybe I'm going to do what these promoters of my party want me to do for the first run, but then when I'm going to second presidency, that's when I'll really do it. But very often you'll get caught up in that cycle and just always end up doing.
So if you stand for what's right from the jump, and you can't be bought, you can't be, you don't align, and you do what's right, you don't have that problem because you know that, you're going to do your very best. You're going to give your best. And if it turned out and you're successful and you win, you'll continue on that right track. So what I want to say is that a lot of times either parties, just because they want a certain thing, that don't mean it's the best thing for our community and it's not in line with what law enforcement should be doing. So at the end of the day, we should all thrive and want a leader who will be who would be very methodical, meticulous, and very unapologetic about doing what's right. And obviously, what's right is, to have, what's in line with the law, what's in line with best practices, what's common sense. And, obviously with having a diverse group of leaders around to add feedback so we can make sure that holistically that we're being inclusive of all parts of our community.
Have you seen any community leaders or political leaders that you feel like that person's doing it right? That person, they're the kind of leader we need. And not necessarily politics, because I know that can be a difficult conversation to get in, but just community in general. Just
I have to think about it. I tend to when I see a lot of great people doing great things, but then, I look at a person, the totality of a person. Like we're in a time now where this person could, I could like 10 things about this person, but the 11th thing I don't like, so I X that person out. I'm not that type person. You know what I mean? But that's the society we live in now. Because I've heard people say, if you don't go with this, I'm not voting for you. So I've resolved in my heart that I may not get some votes just based upon one topic. But I just think that's not thinking about the big picture. You know what I'm saying? Of things. So what I can tell you is that I thrive off of people who are courageous. I thrive off people who would challenge the status quo. I love people who will challenge the good old boy system, and I just love that because that's who I feel I am, and you do it with dignity and you do it because it's the right thing to do. So anybody, even I know often if I can commend somebody for doing it, even if it's a child, even my son to do the right thing, I just I give a pat on the back and I like that. We need more of that.
cool. All right. Something I want to end with something nice and positive. Regarding the future, what are some of the most, and not even necessarily with professional life, maybe even your personal life, what are some of the happiest things you look forward to experiencing in the future?
Yeah. So, well, one thing I just wrote my first children's book.
Oh, cool.
Yes, is the character is her name is Officer Star. She looks like me. Actually, I'm going to show you the book for you.
What's it called?
Well, the first book is titled "You Can Be Anything." So I was really inspired after all of what happened after George Floyd, the protests and everything, because I love kids so much. I saw that the impact that it had on kids in terms of being terrified of men and women in uniform. And I said, well, there's not a lot of representation in children's books about police officers. And a lot of the books talk about police work. So I said, well, this is how I can bridge that gap, right? And speak about, to the hearts of kids and help them connect with Officer Star, who's a police officer. So the first book I wrote was an introduction of her and telling them her life story of how she dreamed of being a police officer and how she was able to, fulfill her dream and encouraging them to know and believe that they can be anything. So I'm excited about that. And certainly I'm excited about the paradigm shift that's happening in our city. Obviously, I'm the first woman to ever run, and as you can see, I'm a brown girl, and so I love these conversations that are happening all around our city. I love meeting people who will say, "Oh, I can never vote for a brown girl," and I'm not upset. I respond in love. I just say, "Look, I hope over the next year and a half you hear my platform and something resonates with you that you'll do the right thing for our city."
Oh my
You
God.
know?
Have you ever heard of Daryl Davis?
Uh,
He's a guy I love to talk about any chance I get. He's a black man who was very fascinated in why are people racist? Like, how can you hate me without knowing me?
right.
So he started having these really deep conversations with Ku Klux Klan members and with Klan, even like leaders, like state and nation leaders of Klans members. And he would have these, they weren't debates as he described them. He wasn't trying to convince them
Right.
they were wrong. He would just sit down and I want to understand, why do you
Oh, yes.
believe what you believe?
That's right. I know who you're talking about. I did see that.
Yeah.
So that is the type of person I am. Like, I want to know. I want to sit down. I want to create this space where I'm not judging you. You believe, you have your thought process. I just want to better understand, and then you hear me out, right?
Yeah.
So to think that I have not had in this male dominant profession any gender biases, racial biases, double standards, or any of that stuff would be so far from the truth, right? So I'm built for this, So what I'm most proud of is to be able to, through my candidacy, break down barriers, right? Because they have a candidate, like I've been sharing my story openly. My story's in books. I've been on national TV. So I'm like, I'm proud to have these discussions to bring about healing within our communities. We need it more now than ever before. So, but I am excited to see how people are standing up and like owning their choice and their voice. They say, look, I am a Republican, but she is the best leader. Oh my gosh. That's breaking down barriers.
Hell yeah. That's what we need.
That's unification. And if you got any one candidate that's able to do that, that's the person that we need. You know what I'm saying? I'm telling you, I think it's powerful and really, and I just feel like I'm a vessel. I'm just a catalyst for this huge transformation that's about to take place that is even bigger than being a law enforcement officer, right? But in this, people are going to begin to reimagine what law enforcement looks like, what it is, It's not just this old white guy, It's this very beautiful queen, right?
There you go. So cool.
She's a diva. When I'm in my uniform, I can, I just have this ability to wear all these different,
That's who you are. You're a million different things. Yeah.
Multifaceted, And that's the type of leadership that you want, leading the department, a very diverse department and multi-generational culture, somebody who can kind of relate and understand and not feel uncomfortable, you know what I mean?
And actually wants to.
And wants to, and be able to bridge that gap between our community and law enforcement. Man, that is when we're going to address violent crime, any type of crime, because we're working together. So I'm excited about the opportunity. And I can tell you, my opponents in this race, they got a fight on their hands.
That's what I like to hear. If anyone wants to learn more about you, is there anywhere they should go to find out about you?
Yeah. So Burton for Sheriff, Burton for Sheriff, Sheriff is for FOR. So Burton for Sheriff. I have a robust social media, my personal Lekisha Burton. So yeah, visit that. Follow me on Facebook or go to my website, Burton for Sheriff.
Fantastic. And I'll post a picture of the book as well.
Thank you.
When I'm posting this. Thank you very much for this conversation.
Thank you. You're awesome.
Ditto. I loved it. All right.
Thank you. That's awesome.